The rain began just after midnight. Not violent rain. Not the kind that crashes loudly against windows or shakes rooftops with thunder. This rain was quieter, gentler, the kind that makes the world feel far away. Water slid slowly down empty storefront windows. Streetlights reflected across soaked pavement in long golden lines. Fog drifted through the streets like slow-moving smoke. And somewhere beyond the dark sleeping town, the ocean breathed softly against the rocks. You pulled your jacket tighter as you walked along the nearly empty road. The hood covered most of your face, but cold rain still touched your cheeks whenever the wind shifted. Your shoes splashed quietly through shallow puddles. The town looked abandoned at this hour. Only a few glowing windows remained awake. A diner near the corner. A lonely gas station. A laundromat humming softly behind fogged glass. Everything else had gone dark hours ago. You checked your phone again. 2:08 a.m. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing waiting for you. You slipped the phone back into your pocket without emotion. Lately, silence had become normal. The strange part was, you weren't even sure when life became this quiet. Maybe loneliness doesn't arrive all at once. Maybe it builds slowly, day after day. One missed conversation, one exhausting week, one forgotten dream at a time. Until suddenly, you wake up one night and realize you no longer feel connected to anything around you. Rain tapped softly against nearby street signs. The ocean wind carried the faint smell of salt through the fog. You stopped walking near the edge of town. Ahead, beyond the wet road and dark cliffs, the sea stretched endlessly beneath the storm clouds. Black water, silver rain, and somewhere far out in the distance, a faint light appeared. You narrowed your eyes slightly. The light glowed softly through the fog. Warm, golden, steady against the darkness. A lighthouse. Your chest tightened strangely. That couldn't be right. The old lighthouse near this town had closed years ago. Most people barely remembered it anymore. The cliffs had become too dangerous. The road leading there had collapsed after a storm long ago. At least, that's what everyone said. But the light remained there, softly glowing through the rain. Almost like it was waiting. The ocean wind grew colder. A low wave crashed against distant rocks below. And then, something strange happened. The lighthouse beam slowly turned, sweeping once across the dark ocean, then once across the cliffs, then finally, across you. The moment the warm light touched your face, a deep calm moved quietly through your chest. Not happiness, not excitement, something softer, like being noticed after feeling invisible for a very long time. The beam moved away again, but the feeling remained. You stared toward the distant lighthouse silently. Rain continued falling around you. And somehow, without fully understanding why, you began walking toward it. The narrow road near the cliffs looked older than you remembered. Cracked pavement, bent guardrails, fog drifting endlessly across the edges. The deeper you walked, the quieter the world became. Even the town sounds disappeared behind you. Only rain remained. Rain and the distant sound of waves below the cliffs. The lighthouse light continued turning slowly through the fog. Guiding, watching, waiting. Your heartbeat slowed strangely with every step. Like part of you already knew this place. Not logically, emotionally. You passed an old wooden sign leaning sideways near the path. Most of the letters had faded away. Only one word remained visible beneath the rain. Harbor. A sudden gust of ocean wind moved through the cliffs. Cold salt air wrapped around you. And somewhere below, waves crashed harder against the rocks. The path narrowed ahead. Fog thickened around the edges. Then finally, through the rain and mist, the lighthouse appeared completely. Your breath caught softly. It stood alone beside the ocean cliffs. Tall, silent, ancient. Warm golden light glowed from the top through the storm. Rainwater shimmered across the stone walls. Small lanterns burned beside the entrance path. And somehow, the entire place felt alive. Not haunted, not frightening, peaceful, like a forgotten memory waiting patiently in the dark. You stepped closer slowly. The sound of the ocean grew louder now, steady waves rolling endlessly beneath the cliffs below. Rain dripped softly from the edge of your hood. The old wooden door near the entrance stood slightly open. Warm light spilled gently onto the wet stone path. You hesitated. Part of you knew this made no sense. Lighthouses abandoned for years do not suddenly relight themselves in the middle of storms. But another part of you, a quieter part, didn't care. Because for the first time in months, maybe years, you felt drawn toward something. You stepped inside. Warmth wrapped around you instantly. The sound of rain softened behind the thick walls. The interior glowed with soft golden light. Old wooden floors creaked gently beneath your shoes. Lanterns flickered warmly along circular stone walls. A small fireplace crackled quietly nearby. The room smelled faintly of salt air, old books, and coffee. Everything felt impossibly calm, like the storm outside belonged to another world completely. You slowly removed your hood. Water dripped softly onto the floor. Near the fireplace sat an old man in a dark sweater. Gray hair, weathered face, calm eyes reflecting firelight. He looked toward you without surprise, almost like he had been expecting you. You made it through the storm, he said softly. His voice was calm, warm. You frowned slightly. I didn't know anyone was here. The old man smiled faintly. Most people don't. Rain tapped softly against the lighthouse windows above. The fire crackled quietly between both of you. You glanced around the room again. Old maps covered one wall. Books stacked beside wooden shelves. A kettle releasing soft steam nearby. The place didn't feel abandoned at all. It felt lived in, protected. The old man slowly poured hot tea into 2 cups, then motioned toward the empty chair across from him. You looked lonely tonight. The words hit harder than expected, not because they were cruel, because they were true. You sat slowly beside the fire. Warmth spread quietly through your cold hands as the old man handed you the tea. Outside, rain continued falling endlessly across the dark ocean. The lighthouse beam turned slowly through the storm, watching the sea, watching the town, watching the lonely people still awake at 2 a.m. The old man looked toward the fire thoughtfully. Most people think this lighthouse guides ships. The flames reflected softly in his tired eyes. But that's not what it was built for. You wrapped both hands around the warm cup. What do you mean? The old man smiled softly, then quietly answered. It guides lost people home. The rain outside grew slightly heavier. The ocean waves rolled endlessly against the cliffs below. And somewhere deep inside yourself, something long forgotten stirred quietly awake. The fire crackled softly inside the lighthouse. Outside, rain continued falling across the endless dark ocean. Waves rolled against the cliffs below in slow, steady rhythms. The warm tea cup rested quietly between your hands. And somehow, for the first time in a long while, you no longer felt cold. The old man sat calmly beside the fireplace. Golden firelight flickered across the stone walls behind him. Everything about this place felt unreal, not magical in an obvious way. Just peaceful in a way the outside world no longer seemed capable of being. The lighthouse beam turned slowly above, soft light sweeping endlessly across rain and fog. You glanced toward the narrow spiral staircase leading upward. The old man noticed immediately. "It's stronger tonight," he said quietly. You frowned slightly. "The storm." The old man smiled faintly. "The loneliness." Rain tapped gently against the windows nearby. The words settled strangely in your chest. You looked back toward the fire. Neither of you spoke for a moment. But the silence didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt safe. Like this lighthouse understood silence better than most people understood words. The old man carefully lifted his tea. "You're wondering why you came here?" You nodded slowly. "Because honestly, you didn't know. You hadn't planned this, hadn't searched for the lighthouse, hadn't even believed it still existed. And yet, the moment the light found you in the rain, something inside you followed it without hesitation. The old man stared quietly into the fire. People only see this lighthouse when they need it. A soft gust of wind moved against the stone walls outside. The road doesn't appear for everyone. You look toward him carefully. What kind of people does it appear for? The firelight reflected gently in his tired eyes. People carrying too much sadness. The ocean roared softly below the cliffs. People who stopped feeling connected to the world. His voice remained calm. People who became lonely for so long. He paused slightly. They forgot who they were before the loneliness. Your chest tightened quietly. Because somehow, those words felt painfully personal. The old man stood slowly from his chair. The wooden floor creaked beneath his footsteps. Then he motioned gently toward the spiral staircase. "Come with me," Rain whispered softly outside the lighthouse windows. You followed him up the narrow staircase slowly. The higher you climbed, the louder the storm became. Ocean wind moving against the stone tower. Rain brushing softly across the glass above. Warm lantern lights glowed along the curved walls as both of you climbed higher into the lighthouse. Finally, you reached the top. The lighthouse chamber opened around you in soft golden light. Large windows surrounded the circular room completely. Beyond them, the endless stormy ocean stretched beneath the night sky. Rain covered the glass in shimmering silver lines. The lighthouse beam rotated slowly overhead. Steady, peaceful, beautiful. Your breath caught softly. The view felt enormous. The whole world below looked small beneath the rain and darkness. The old man walked toward the windows quietly. You know what loneliness does to people. You remained silent. The ocean waves crashed softly against the cliffs below. It makes them disappear slowly. The lighthouse beam turned across the sea again. Not physically. His reflection shimmered faintly in the rain-covered glass. Emotionally, you stared out toward the dark horizon. Somewhere far away, tiny town lights flickered through the fog. The old man continued softly. People stopped talking about the things they love. Rain rolled slowly down the windows. They stopped creating. The beam turned again. They stopped dreaming. Your chest tightened with every word. Because lately, that's exactly what your life had become. Wake up, work. Scroll endlessly through glowing screens. Sleep badly. Repeat. Every day blending together until months disappeared without meaning anything. The old man looked toward you carefully. You were not always this tired. The sentence hit harder than expected, not because it sounded dramatic, because it sounded true. You looked down quietly. No. The old man nodded gently. None of us were. Silence filled the lighthouse again. Only rain. Only waves. Only the steady turning light above. Then suddenly, you noticed something strange outside the windows. Far below, near the cliffs beside the ocean, figures stood motionless in the rain. Dozens of them. Your heartbeat slowed slightly. People, standing silently near the crashing waves. You stepped closer to the glass. Their faces were impossible to see clearly through fog and rain. But somehow, you could feel their sadness. The old man spoke softly behind you. They hear the light too. Rain slid endlessly down the windows. Some arrive. The lighthouse beam turned slowly across the sea. Some don't. You watched the distant figures carefully. One stood completely alone near the cliff edge beneath the storm. Another sat quietly on the rocks staring into the ocean. None of them moved. They simply stood there beneath the rain, lost in their own thoughts. Your chest ached softly, because deep down, you understood them. The old man walked beside you slowly. Loneliness becomes dangerous when people stop believing anyone would notice if they disappeared. The storm outside grew heavier for a moment, waves crashing harder below. But inside the lighthouse, everything remained warm, steady, safe. The old man pointed softly toward the rotating light above. That's why the lighthouse exists. You looked toward him quietly. To help lonely people. The old man smiled faintly. To remind them they are still visible. Those words settled deeply into your chest. Because lately, you often felt invisible too. Not physically, emotionally, like you were moving through life without anyone truly seeing you. The old man looked toward the rain-covered horizon. Most people carry loneliness silently. The lighthouse beam swept slowly across the storm again. They laughed. They work. They keep moving. His tired eyes reflected the ocean darkness. But deep inside, he paused softly. They're waiting for someone to notice the light fading. The room became quiet again. And suddenly, you realized something strange. This lighthouse didn't feel lonely at all, even though it stood alone in the middle of endless storms. Because loneliness wasn't about being physically alone. It was about feeling disconnected, forgotten, unseen. The lighthouse remained connected to the sea, to the storm, to the people searching for its light. The old man glanced toward you again. That's why you came. Rain continued softly against the windows. You were beginning to disappear from yourself. Your throat tightened slightly, because deep down, you knew exactly what he meant. You had stopped caring about the things that once made life feel meaningful. Stopped creating. Stopped dreaming. Stopped feeling fully alive. The lighthouse beam turned again through the darkness. Then suddenly, the old man asked quietly, "What did you love before the loneliness?" You froze. The question felt strangely difficult. Not because you didn't know, because you hadn't allowed yourself to think about it for a very long time. Rain whispered against the glass around both of you. And slowly, old memories began surfacing quietly inside your chest. Warm nights creating stories, drawing beside rainy windows. Dreaming about making beautiful things that comforted people. The old man watched your expression carefully. A faint smile touched his face. There you are. Outside. The endless ocean continued breathing beneath the storm. And somewhere deep inside yourself, something long buried beneath exhaustion finally began waking up again. Rain continued falling across the dark ocean. The lighthouse beam turned slowly through the storm. Soft golden light swept across the waves again and again. Steady against the endless night, you stood quietly beside the window at the top of the lighthouse, watching distant rain disappear into the sea. The old man remained silent beside you. The room felt warm despite the storm outside. Safe, almost unreal. But the question he asked still echoed quietly inside your chest. What did you love before the loneliness? You hadn't thought about that part of yourself in years. Not truly, because somewhere along the way, life became smaller. Not physically, emotionally. Dreams turned into routines. Excitement became exhaustion, and the things that once made your heart feel alive slowly disappeared beneath stress and endless noise. The old man walked slowly toward a narrow wooden door near the back of the lighthouse chamber. The door blended almost perfectly into the stone wall. You hadn't noticed it before. He rested his hand softly against the handle. Most people think the lighthouse ends here. Rain tapped gently against the giant windows surrounding the room. But there's one more floor. The ocean wind moved softly around the tower outside. The old man opened the door slowly. Warm amber light spilled down a narrow staircase. Beyond it you frowned slightly. I thought this was the top. The old man smiled faintly. For most people, it is. Then he began climbing the hidden staircase quietly. You followed. The wooden steps creaked softly beneath your feet. The higher you climbed, the quieter the storm became. Until eventually, only soft rain remained. Then finally, the staircase opened into another room, and your breath caught instantly. The room looked impossible. Warm hanging lanterns glowed softly above wooden floors. Tall shelves filled with old books lined curved walls. Large rain-covered windows overlooked the ocean far below. Soft jazz music played faintly somewhere in the background. A fireplace crackled gently beside a cozy chair. Sketchbooks rested on wooden tables. Paintings leaned against walls. Steam rose quietly from fresh coffee near the windows. The entire room felt peaceful, creative, alive, like stepping inside forgotten comfort itself. You slowly looked around in disbelief. This place. The old man walked calmly toward the windows. It changes for each person. Rain slid gently down the glass behind him. It becomes whatever part of themselves they missed most. Your chest tightened quietly. Because somehow, this room felt familiar. Not literally, emotionally. It reminded you of nights long ago. Nights spent creating things quietly while rain fell outside your apartment windows. The old man picked up one of the sketchbooks from a nearby table, then handed it toward you. Your hands hesitated slightly before taking it. The cover felt warm, soft from years of use. You opened it carefully. Inside, your heartbeat stopped. Every page contained drawings, rainy train stations, cozy cafes glowing at midnight, lighthouses during storms, dreamlike city streets beneath fog, all the worlds you once imagined, all the stories you once wanted to tell. Your throat tightened immediately. Because these weren't random sketches. They were yours. Dreams you abandoned quietly over time. The old man watched you gently. You left pieces of yourself behind. Rain whispered softly outside the windows. But they stayed here. You turned another page slowly. More drawings. Story ideas. Small handwritten notes. Late night thoughts you had forgotten completely. One sentence near the bottom of a page caught your eye. I want to create stories that make lonely people feel warm again. Your chest hurt softly reading it. Because you remembered writing those words. Years ago. Back when life still felt full of possibility. The old man walked toward the fireplace slowly. Loneliness doesn't destroy dreams immediately. The fire crackled warmly beside him. It simply convinces people they no longer matter. You stared quietly at the sketchbook. Rain slid endlessly across the giant windows beyond the room. Somewhere deep down, you realized something painful. You stopped creating not because you failed, but because you slowly stopped believing your creations mattered. The old man looked toward the ocean. The world exhausts gentle people. The lighthouse being turned slowly outside, especially the ones who feel deeply. You sat quietly near the window, the sketchbook resting open across your lap. Outside, waves rolled endlessly beneath silver rain, and for the first time in years, your thoughts felt quiet enough to hear yourself again. The old man poured fresh coffee into 2 cups. Steam curled softly upward. Then he handed one to you. Warmth spread immediately through your hands. Do you know why storms reveal the lighthouse? You shook your head slowly. The old man smiled faintly. Because storms make people honest. Rain tapped gently against the windows behind both of you. During ordinary days, people stay distracted, busy, loud. The lighthouse beam swept softly across the ocean again. But storms slow the world down. His reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, and in silence, he paused softly. People finally hear the loneliness inside themselves. The room became quiet again. Only soft jazz, only rain, only the warm crackling fire. You looked toward the endless dark ocean below. Then quietly asked, "Does the lighthouse?" The storm grew heavier around the lighthouse. Rain struck the giant windows in soft silver waves. Ocean wind moved through the cliffs below with a deep, hollow sound. The lighthouse beam continued turning steadily through the darkness, warm and constant against the storm. You stood quietly near the window holding the sketchbook against your chest. Far below, through rain and drifting fog, more figures had appeared near the cliffs. Some stood completely still beside the crashing ocean. Others slowly walked the narrow path toward the lighthouse light. None of them spoke. They simply moved through the storm like people searching for something they could not explain. The old man watched silently beside the windows. His tired eyes reflected the turning beam overhead. Then suddenly, 3 soft knocks echoed from downstairs. The sound disappeared beneath the rain almost immediately. But the old man heard it clearly. He looked toward the hidden staircase quietly. She found the light. Your chest tightened slightly. Who? The old man gave a faint smile. Someone carrying too much loneliness. He slowly walked toward the staircase. You followed him downstairs through the warm lantern glow. The lower floors of the lighthouse felt quieter now. The storm outside sounded deeper, more distant. When you reached the main room again, the old wooden door near the entrance stood partially open. Cold rain drifted softly through the gap. And beside the doorway, a young woman stood completely soaked from the storm. Her dark coat dripped rainwater onto the floorboards beneath her feet. Long wet hair clung softly against her face. But the first thing you noticed was the exhaustion in her eyes. Not physical exhaustion, the deeper kind. The kind carried by people who had been emotionally tired for far too long. She looked around the lighthouse slowly, almost cautiously, like she wasn't fully sure this place was real. The old man stepped toward her calmly. You made it through the storm. The woman nodded faintly, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw the light. Rain tapped softly against the windows behind her. The old man gently took her soaked coat and placed it near the fire. Then quietly handed her a warm towel. Sit. The woman hesitated briefly before moving toward the fireplace. She sat slowly in the same chair you used earlier. And suddenly, you realized something strange. A few hours ago, you probably looked exactly the same. Lost, disconnected, unsure why you came here. The old man poured another cup of tea quietly. Steam curled softly upward between warm lantern light. The woman wrapped both hands around the cup immediately, as if she hadn't felt warmth in a long time. The fire crackled gently nearby. No one spoke for a moment. Only rain. Only waves below the cliffs. Only the steady lighthouse beam turning overhead. Then finally, the old man asked softly, "How long have you been carrying it?" The woman stared silently into the tea. Her tired eyes reflected firelight faintly. "A while." The answer sounded automatic, like she had repeated it too many times before. The old man nodded slowly. Loneliness becomes heavy when people pretend they're okay for too long. The woman lowered her gaze quietly, and suddenly, tears filled her eyes. Not dramatic tears, not uncontrollable crying. Just silent exhaustion finally breaking through. Your chest tightens softly watching her, because you understood that feeling completely. The moment someone finally stops pretending they're fine. The old man remained calm beside the fire. "You don't need to hide it here." Rain moved softly across the lighthouse windows. The woman wiped her eyes quickly. Embarrassed. "I don't even know why I came." The old man smiled gently. "Yes, you do." The room became quiet again. Then slowly, the woman looked toward the windows, toward the endless rain outside. "I just," her voice trembled slightly, "didn't want to feel invisible anymore." Those words settled heavily into the warm room, because suddenly, everything inside the lighthouse felt painfully human. Not magical, not mysterious, just honest. A place where lonely people could finally say the things they hid from the rest of the world. The old man glanced toward you quietly, then back toward the woman. "The storm brings many people here for the same reason." The lighthouse beam swept softly across the ocean outside. They begin disappearing from themselves. The woman stared into the fire silently. You noticed the way her shoulders relaxed slightly, like simply hearing someone understand her pain made it lighter. The old man stood slowly, then looked toward both of you. "Come upstairs." Rain whispered softly around the lighthouse tower. The three of you climbed the hidden staircase together. When the woman stepped into the warm upper room, her expression changed instantly. Soft lantern light glowed across shelves of books and sketches. Rain slid gently across the giant windows overlooking the ocean. The fireplace crackled peacefully nearby, and somehow, the room adjusted again. Not dramatically, quietly. A piano now rested near one corner beneath warm hanging lights. Sheet music scattered softly across its surface. The woman froze immediately. The old man noticed, then smiled gently. It changes for everyone. The woman slowly approached the piano. Her fingertips touched the keys carefully, almost emotionally. "You play?" you asked softly. She nodded slightly. "Oh." A faint sad smile appeared. "I used to." Your chest tightened again, because the sentence sounded painfully familiar. The old man walked toward the rain-covered windows. Loneliness often begins when people abandon the parts of themselves that once brought them peace. Outside, waves crashed softly against the cliffs below. The woman sat slowly at the piano bench. Her fingers rested uncertainly above the keys. Then finally, she played a single note. Soft, warm. The sound echoed beautifully through the lighthouse room. Rain continued falling outside, and suddenly, something changed in the atmosphere. The room felt alive again. Not because the music was perfect, because it was honest. The woman looked down quietly at the piano. "I stopped playing years ago." The old man nodded gently. "But part of you never stopped missing it." The lighthouse beam turned slowly through the storm outside. And for the first time that night, the woman smiled. Very small, very tired, but real. You watched silently from beside the window. And suddenly, you understood the lighthouse more clearly than before. It wasn't a place that removed loneliness. It was a place that reminded people of the pieces of themselves they thought were gone forever. Outside, the storm continued endlessly across the dark ocean. But inside the lighthouse, warm light, soft music, and quiet human connection glowed against the rain. and somewhere deep inside yourself, the loneliness no longer felt quite as endless as before. Rain continued endlessly beyond the lighthouse windows. The ocean below rolled through darkness in slow silver waves. Inside the hidden room above the storm, warm lantern light flickered softly across bookshelves, sketches, and old wooden floors. The woman continued playing the piano quietly. Gentle notes drifted through the room like rain itself. Slow, emotional, peaceful, the lighthouse beam turned steadily overhead, and for the first time that night, the storm no longer felt lonely. You sat near the giant windows overlooking the ocean. The sketchbook rested open beside you. Across the room, the old man stood calmly beside the fireplace, watching both of you with quiet understanding. The woman's music softened further, then slowly stopped. Silence returned gently to the room. Only rain remained. The woman stared down at the piano keys for a long moment, then quietly asked, "How many people come here?" The old man looked toward the windows thoughtfully. "More than you'd think." The lighthouse beam swept softly across the sea again, especially during storms. The woman lowered her gaze slightly. "And what happens to them?" The old man smiled faintly. "Most remember something important." Rain rolled slowly down the glass around the room. "Then they leave." The woman frowned softly. "Most." The old man remained silent for a moment, then quietly answered, "Some stay too long." A strange heaviness settled briefly into the room. The fire crackled softly nearby. You looked toward him carefully. "What do you mean?" The old man slowly walked toward one of the giant windows overlooking the ocean cliffs below. Far beneath the lighthouse, small figures still stood near the rocks in the rain, watching the light, waiting. The old man's reflection shimmered faintly across the glass. Some lonely people forget how to return to the world. Ocean wind brushed softly around the lighthouse tower. They become afraid of leaving the peace behind. The woman looked toward the fireplace silently. You understood immediately, because honestly, Part of you already feared the same thing. The outside world suddenly felt distant, now too loud, too fast, too exhausting compared to this place. The lighthouse felt safe, warm, gentle, like stepping outside time itself. The old man glanced back toward both of you. That's the danger. Rain tapped softly against the windows. This place can remind people who they are. The lighthouse beam swept across the dark sea again, but it cannot live their lives for them. Silence filled the room once more. The woman slowly closed the piano lid. You sound like you've seen it happen before. The old man smiled sadly. Many times. The firelight flickered across his weathered face. Loneliness makes people believe peace only exists far away from the world. He looked toward the storm outside. But real healing begins when they carry that peace back with them. Your eyes drifted toward the sketchbook beside you. Pages filled with forgotten dreams. Stories. Ideas. Pieces of yourself abandoned over time. Quietly, you realized something painful. You spent years waiting for life to magically feel meaningful again. But meaning was never something that arrived on its own. It had to be created, protected, chosen. The old man looked toward you softly. You understand now. You nodded faintly. Outside, waves crashed gently against the cliffs below. Rain continued falling endlessly through the night. Then suddenly, a distant bell echoed from somewhere beneath the lighthouse. Low, hollow. The woman looked up immediately. What was that? The old man turned toward the staircase slowly. His calm expression shifted slightly. Another visitor. The room became still again. Only soft rain. Only ocean wind. Then, another sound followed. Footsteps. Slow footsteps climbing the lighthouse stairs below. Different from before. Heavier somehow. More uncertain. The old man walked quietly toward the hidden staircase. You and the woman followed behind him. By the time all three of you reached the lower room, the front door stood wide open. Cold rain blew softly across the floorboards. And near the doorway, a man stood motionless beneath the lantern light. Older than both of you. Late 40s maybe. Dark coat soaked from rain. Eyes hollow with exhaustion. But unlike the woman earlier, this man looked emotionally empty. Not sad, not emotional, just numb. The old man studied him carefully, then quietly said, "You almost didn't follow the light." The man gave a tired laugh. Barely even a laugh. Didn't think it was real. Rainwater dripped slowly from his sleeves onto the floor. The lighthouse beam turned softly above. The man looked around the room. The fire, the lanterns, the warmth, and suddenly, his eyes filled with emotion so quickly it almost startled you. He lowered his head immediately. Like he was embarrassed by it, the old man gently handed him a towel. Then motioned toward the fire. "You're safe here." The man sat slowly beside the fireplace. His hands trembled slightly as he warmed them near the flames. Silence filled the room again. Then finally, he whispered quietly, "I don't remember the last time somewhere felt warm." The sentence hit harder than expected, not because of the words themselves, because of how honestly he said them. The old man remained beside the fire calmly. People become cold when they carry loneliness for too long. Rain moved softly against the windows nearby. The man stared into the flames. "My wife used to love storms." The room became still. "She died 3 years ago." The ocean wind brushed softly around the lighthouse tower outside. Ever since then, his voice weakened slightly. "Everything feels empty." The fire crackled gently between all of you. No one interrupted him. The old man simply listened. And somehow, that quiet listening felt more comforting than advice ever could. The man rubbed his tired eyes slowly. "I kept pretending I was okay." Rain continued softly outside, but eventually, he swallowed quietly. "I stopped feeling anything." The old man nodded gently. Grief and loneliness often arrive together. The lighthouse beam swept slowly across the storm again. And when people bury those feelings long enough, his voice softened. They begin disappearing from themselves. The room fell silent once more. But now, something felt different. Not lighter exactly, just more human. Three strangers sitting inside a hidden lighthouse during a storm, all carrying different versions of loneliness. And somehow, none of you felt completely alone anymore. The woman looked toward the rain-covered windows quietly, then softly asked, "Why does the lighthouse help people?" The old man stared into the fire for a long moment. Then finally answered, "Because someone once helped me." The room became completely still. Even the storm outside seemed quieter for a moment. The old man smiled faintly at the flames. "A long time ago," rain whispered endlessly around the lighthouse. "I followed the light too." The fire crackled softly inside the lighthouse. Outside, the storm still covered the ocean in rain and fog. But something about the night had changed. The darkness no longer felt endless. The room remained warm beneath glowing lantern light. The woman sat quietly beside the piano. The older man rested near the fireplace staring into the flames. And the old lighthouse keeper stood silently near the rain-covered windows. The lighthouse beam continued turning slowly above the storm. Steady, patient. Watching the sea, watching the lonely people still awake in the night. You looked toward the old man carefully. A long time ago, rain slid gently down the glass behind him. "I followed the light too." The sentence echoed quietly through the room. The woman looked up from the piano. The older man lifted his tired eyes from the fire. And for the first time, the old lighthouse keeper seemed less mysterious. Less like part of the lighthouse itself. More human. He walked slowly toward the fireplace. The warm light flickered across his weathered face. "When I was younger," he smiled faintly at the flames. "I thought loneliness was weakness." Ocean waves rolled softly below the cliffs outside. so I hid it. The lighthouse beam swept quietly across the storm. I worked constantly. I ignored people who cared about me. I kept telling myself I was fine. Rain whispered endlessly against the windows. But loneliness grows in silence. The room remained still around him. No one interrupted, because somehow every person there understood exactly what he meant. The old man slowly sat beside the fire. One night, his tired eyes reflected the flames softly. During a storm much like this one, he paused quietly. I saw the lighthouse. The woman listened carefully. Now the older man beside the fire remained completely still. The old keeper smiled sadly. At first I thought I imagined it. Outside, fog drifted endlessly across the ocean cliffs. But something inside me followed the light anyway. His voice softened further. And when I arrived here, the lighthouse beam turned slowly overhead. Someone was waiting for me too. Silence filled the room. The rain outside had become gentler now, softer against the glass. The old keeper looked around the warm lighthouse room quietly. He reminded me of something important. You leaned slightly forward. What? The old man smiled gently. That loneliness is not cured by hiding from the world. The fire crackled softly nearby. It's healed by reconnecting to what makes us feel alive. Your chest tightened quietly, because now, everything inside the lighthouse made sense. The sketches, the piano, the stories, the warmth. The lighthouse didn't exist to trap lonely people away from the world. It existed to remind them who they were before loneliness convinced them to disappear. The woman stared thoughtfully at the piano. The older man beside the fire rubbed his hands slowly together. And you looked down at the sketchbook resting quietly in your lap. Outside, the storm clouds had begun thinning slightly above the ocean. Small gaps appeared between the darkness. The old keeper noticed. The storm is ending. Something about those words felt unexpectedly emotional. Because suddenly, you realized what that meant. The lighthouse would disappear again. The woman seemed to realize it too. Her expression shifted softly. "What happens now?" The old keeper stood slowly from his chair. "Now," he smiled faintly, "you return." Rain continued softly beyond the windows. The older man near the fire frowned slightly. "And if we don't want to?" The old keeper walked calmly toward the giant windows overlooking the ocean cliffs. For a long moment, he simply watched the waves below, then quietly answered, "Then loneliness wins." The room became silent again. Not heavy silence, honest silence. The kind that appears when people hear a truth they already knew deep inside themselves. The lighthouse keeper turned back toward all of you. "This place is only a reminder." Warm lantern light glowed softly around him. A pause during the storm. The lighthouse beam swept across the ocean one more time. But your real life still waits for you beyond the rain. You looked quietly down at the sketchbook, then slowly opened it again. Pages filled with dreams you abandoned years ago. Stories, ideas, comforting worlds you once wanted to create for others. And suddenly, for the first time in years, those dreams no longer felt childish. They felt necessary. The woman beside the piano touched the keys softly again. Not sadly this time. Almost hopefully. The older man stared into the fireplace. But now, the emptiness in his eyes seemed smaller somehow. The old keeper smiled gently at all of you. The world outside will still be loud tomorrow. Rain rolled softly down the windows. People will still disappoint you. The ocean moved endlessly beneath the cliffs below. There will still be lonely nights. The lighthouse beam turned slowly above. But now, his voice softened warmly. You remember the light exists. Silence settled peacefully around the room. And somehow, that felt enough. Outside, the rain slowly weakened. The fog above the ocean began drifting apart. And far beyond the cliffs, the first faint signs of morning appeared across the horizon. Dark blue skies slowly softened toward silver. The woman noticed first. Sunrise. The old keeper nodded quietly. The lighthouse disappears with daylight. Your chest tightens softly again. Not from sadness exactly, more from understanding. Some places are not meant to be permanent, only remembered. The older man near the fireplace stood slowly. Then quietly asked, "Will we ever find this place again?" The old keeper smiled gently. "If you truly need it." The room grew warmer as dawn slowly approached outside. The storm had nearly ended now, only soft rain remained against the glass. The woman stood from the piano bench. You closed the sketchbook carefully, and the older man quietly finished the last of his tea. No one rushed to leave, because all of you understood. Something important had changed during the night. Not dramatically, quietly. The kind of change that begins deep inside people before they fully notice it themselves. The old keeper walked toward the lighthouse door slowly, then opened it. Cool ocean air drifted softly inside. The cliffs beyond glowed faintly beneath early morning light. Rain shimmered across the rocks below, and for the first time all night, the ocean no longer looked lonely. The woman stepped outside first, then the older man. Finally, you paused near the doorway, turning back toward the lighthouse room one last time. Warm lanterns, soft firelight, rain against giant windows, the hidden room above the storm. The old keeper stood quietly beside the door, then gently said, "Don't disappear from yourself again." The words settled deeply into your chest. You nodded softly, then stepped out into the fading rain. Behind you, the lighthouse beam turned one final time across the ocean. Warm golden light sweeping through the morning fog. And then slowly, as sunlight touched the cliffs, the lighthouse faded into mist. Gone. As if it had never been there at all, only the sound of soft rain remained. And somewhere deep inside yourself, the light remained too.